confirms what you're saying here. My buddy who went back to visit his family, you know, confirmed his decision to leave for Germany 25 years ago to go work there. All right, but he's got brothers and nephews and probably nieces. He didn't mention them, but a whole bunch of folks still living in Egypt that he was real worried about. He's probably more worried about them than he was back when Mubarak was in charge. But as far as, yeah, the reason he left Egypt was because there was no work that he could get for him. He got a degree in chemistry and, you know, wasn't going to get any kind of job in Egypt. That's why he left. And he says, yeah, that now, you know, at least the people that he talks to know that you're not going to go put up with that anymore. So who's going to go create jobs? That's God, we need to answer to that. Yeah. That's a whole other problem, but they're not going to go just say, yep, that's the way it is. We can't do anything about it except for leave the country.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, again, whoever ends up controlling Egypt probably will not be able to solve the economic problems. I mean, you know, it's just, you've got a you got a growing population, burgeoning population that, and you can't feed them, and there's no work for educated people, and they don't know how to fix that. Nobody knows how to fix that.
To make matters worse, Egypt's economy also depends on tourism, and I imagine all this turmoil and unrest is not helping.
It's been a bad year.
Yes, it's not helping at all.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Can we go organize a trip?
Yeah,
I'll go.
Yeah. Organize a trip. I mean, maybe I'd wait a couple months to see.
Sure.
The way to go to Egypt, you don't want to just pop in, all right? I mean, really.
You go parachute in a sniper rifle and strap your back.
Well, no, I mean, it's too unsettled, and for instance, if you simply went to the pyramids now as an individual Westerner, I mean, you would be inundated with beggars, and people wanted to sell you tchotchkes. And I mean, it would be, and they never let go of you. I mean, it's like really bad. And so the way to go to Egypt is go on a tour, you know?
Or
really.
go see my buddy Muhammad and get his family here around.
Yeah, that's the other way. That's the other way.
Yeah.
You just don't want to pop in. I wouldn't do that.
And I just want to echo what Dr. Davidson is saying about theory of expectations and the revolution. And there's a political scientist named Davies who had this idea of the J curve, and that is that, you know, once the expectations rise, people want to try to meet that. And so, although that might sound rather abstract and symbolic, it's irrevocable. And in terms of that rise that's there, that has not yet been reached, that's people are really conscious about that, and that's the cynicism and the instability. But I think Egypt is also, and I don't know, you know, from whence this comes, it's kind of like pulling together lots of different pieces of what I've been reading about it and hearing over the last year, is that Egyptians don't want a civil war. Like that's really not something that most people are ready to go to. Right, you know, a riot or
it's a rare person.
But I mean, most people don't want to go there, you know, because they know the stakes. And you know, if unemployment is 25% for people between 16 and 25 now, if there's a war, then they have to, you know, redevelop and reconstruct that kind of a, you know, set of losses. And a lot of people are pretty conscious about that because it is the region that it is, you know, like Libya. You want to look like that? You know, like, I mean, so that's...
There's a long-term question there about Egypt's future. Right next door to Egypt is a sparsely populated country with vast oil reserves and what have you. What's going to come of that in the years to come? Yeah, hard to imagine, but...
There's something for the Egyptian army to do.
Yes. Yes.
Youth, just go next door.
Let's go over there and we'll go and provide security. That's how it starts.
Let's restore stability. Order.
It's scary.
Yes, very.
Any other ones, Nick?
See how much time? Yeah, it's only 15 minutes. Okay. Can you imagine much positive development in Egypt without much further popular unrest, since most forms of demonstrations and striking are illegal, but the conditions for the masses are still as horrible as they are. What other resorts do they have, or are they really just left with having to violate the government and go against the newly reorganized government in order to improve conditions? Is there a method for them to improve themselves without
You mean
undermining the government they put out?
civil liberties conditions and that kind of thing?
More
That's gonna change. I mean, strikes will become, the ability to strike will be legalized soon, and all that kind of stuff. That'll change. But what's more difficult to change is, the whole economic scope of things, right?
10 million people crowd into a city, they're probably not going to be able to do neighborhood organizations and community gardens to go and uplift things. So, yeah, I don't have anywhere near the kind of information I need to answer that question. But I just noted
They have to be
crowded real dense, so it's going to be hard to do
They have to
anything
be
without
able
a
to
bigger
feed
solution.
themselves,
Yeah.
right? I mean, somehow they have to extract themselves from the foreign markets. They've already started by refusing more IMF loans, which was a very good beginning. And they have to somehow convert a lot of the cotton fields to the production of foodstuffs. I mean, that's what I would do. But you need to go back to a socialist kind of sort of economic planning to actually do that. And there aren't a lot of socialists left in Egypt.
It's worth pointing out, too, that if we're going to go along that way, most of the socialist tradition in Egypt, and even the current revolutionary socialist group, is in fact a Stalinist organization, had been dominated by the Stalinist school of thought.
Yeah, well, that's going to go nowhere. I mean,
It's not even going to work in Russia anymore. Yeah.
there is in an Islamic tradition, right, where those who
Community self-help.
yeah, and those who have wealth are supposed to give back some of that wealth to the community. And so, I mean, I think, and the Muslim Brotherhood has a tradition of selfless, kind of helping of the poor. So I think that within the Islamic tradition, there are avenues for what might look like, socialism to us, but it's not really. And so the Muslim Brothers could essentially persuade some of these landowners to convert to get out of the foreign cotton market and to convert to cash crops, what have you. I don't know. I'm sure there are people in Egypt who are thinking about this, but I think the first thing in terms of helping people is that you have to have a country that can feed itself.
I mean, this certainly offers no solution to anybody in Egypt, but a different tack on your question would be to say, all right, is there any chance the Egyptians are going to modify their expectations in some way, right? Lower them by Western material standards. And of course, everybody's walking around with a cell phone, waiting for the next thing to happen. My guess is they're pretty much tied into a set of expectations. It's really real hard to alter.
Well, I mean, I don't.
This is where the Muslim Brotherhood, though, has something to offer.
Yeah, and remember, I mean, there are village populations out there who have different kinds of expectations, and the only reason that you've had this kind of movement from the village to the city is because the villages have been neglected, and there's been environmental degradation and the deserts.
Low prices for the things they do produce.
Right,
Sure.
and so, I mean, what you need is a planned economy to get out of this. And I'm sure there are people out there who are thinking about this.
Any further questions from our lovely attenders here?
We just want to comment about Palestine. Recently, some say they have been used the Arab Spring as a launching point to getting the nationhood. I was wondering, do you think they actually have a shot this time around? Some nations have already recognized them.
I mean, listen, I mean, you can call yourself anything you want. I mean, you can call yourself fried chicken if you want. But being an independent nation, is something that you can actually recognize. And there's the most independent group of Palestinians in Palestine itself happens to be the people in prison in Gaza. And the Israelis have absolutely no intention of giving the West Bank Palestinians anything but their version of Bantustans, right?
And that was the word that came right to mind when you asked your question from South Africa. There was
Right.
up to places that South Africa claimed were independent.
That's right.
Nobody else ever bothered to recognize it.
So the deal here is that you have to, this is my opinion anyway, that there's a long-term struggle that has to go on the South African model, and there's two internationally, in terms of its international aspects, there's two prongs. One is to maintain and grow an international boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign against the Israelis. And the other is somehow to make American support of Israeli behavior a national scandal in this country and make it a voting issue, and thereby pressure for a change in American policy. If ever we can get a change in American policy, my feeling is the Zionist regime in Israel will collapse within 6 to 9 months or something like that, if the Americans cut them off. But that's a big if, right? And it's a long-term project.
That's predicting a U.S. veto on the resolution in the UN.
Well, if the Palestinians, if the PLO brought this thing to the Security Council, the Americans would veto it. If they brought a proposition that the UN should recognize them as an independent country, the Americans would veto it. And even if they didn't, even if the Palestinians somehow got full membership in the UN, so what? I mean, it give them some leverage in certain international venues, but it won't change Israeli behavior on the ground.
Do you think Israel would actually disapprove of a UN court order against
They would
the
ignore
Saudis?
it.
Yeah.
Wouldn't need it.
They would ignore it. As long as the Americans protect them, just thumb their noses at it. How many Americans or Israelis have you seen dragged before the ICC? I mean, it doesn't happen. I mean, if you're a Serbian, or if you're from Sierra Leone, or someplace like that, you might get dragged before the ICC. If you're a Russian, a Chinese, American, or any ally of those great powers, forget it. It doesn't happen.
And one of the measures, I think, of statehood would be ability to defend your borders. That doesn't necessarily mean stop all comers, but do it through a combination of military, police, diplomacy, treaties, whatever else you got to do. And I was living in a small country in Africa back, bordered on South Africa back during the apartheid years, and everybody was pretty proud how independent Swaziland was, except for the day when the South African police came across. That's where folks who were on the wrong side of the regime in South Africa would go over to Swaziland to live. And one day there was a big move, big haul, and they took like 50 people out of 5 different towns and dragged them back over to South Africa for trial. And after that, it was a little bit harder for Swaziland to claim to be independent. So you're right, I don't think Palestine, whether you give it a seat in the UN or not, is going to be in a position to prevent that kind of thing. Should we give our audience an applause here?
Any final questions before we finish this up, or we Okay, well, thank you guys very much. We really appreciate you coming here. So how about we give an applause to our panelists here then.